When Ted Wire was found, he had been missing for more than 3 months. He was inside a Forest Service trailer almost 20 miles from the car he had disappeared from. He had lost between 80 to 100 pounds. His feet were badly frostbitten, and based on the growth of his beard, investigators believed he had survived for at least 8 weeks, possibly even longer. This is the part that makes this case so hard to explain. Ted did not die in the snow beside the car. He had made it to a shelter with food, matches, and heavy clothing. A shelter with a way to make heat, and still, he died there. Not immediately, not weekly. Weeks later, one of them reached the place that should have saved him, and still, weeks later, he was found dead. To understand how that happened, we need to go back to the last normal thing they ever did, a basketball game. February 24th, 1978, Yuba County, California. The men were Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Ted Wire, Jackie Hewitt, and Gary Mathias. They were friends. They played basketball together for the Gateway Gators, a team connected to the Yuba City Gateway program. The next morning, they had a game of their own, so when they left that Friday night, they were not leaving their lives behind. Their families expected them back. Some of their clothing were already laid out for the tournament. Gary had reportedly reminded his family not to let him oversleep. Everything about the next day was still waiting for them. Jack Madruga was 30. He owned a car, a 1969 Mercury Montego. His family said he cared about it, and he was careful with it. One story says he once refused to drive a rough road because he was worried it would damage the vehicle. So when that same car later appeared on a remote mountain road, almost undamaged, it would raise a question before anyone ever found a body. Why would Jack take it there? Bill Sterling was 29. He was close with Jack. Quiet, religious, known for reading. He had been camping before, but according to his family, he did not like the snow. None of this sounds like someone looking for a late-night trip into the mountain. Ted Wire was 32. He was the oldest. He was close to Jack Hewitt, and Jackie often stayed near him. Ted was the man from the trailer, the one who made it further than expected, the one whose death turned this from a disappearance into something much harder to explain. Jackie Hewitt was 24, the youngest of the group. His family described him as a happy, gentle, and very close to Ted. This case is often described through this man's disabilities, and that context matters. But it should never become the only thing you know about them. They were sons, friends, teammates, people with routines, preferences, fears, and a family who noticed immediately when something was wrong. Gary Mathias was 25, an army veteran. He had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, but he was reportedly taking medication and doing better before the disappearance. Gary is where a lot of theories go, partly because he knew people near one of the possible routes, partly because he and Jack were the only ones with driver's licenses, mostly because Gary was the only one never found. But be careful with that. Gary being missing does not make him guilty, and you will see why later. 5 names, 1 car, a game in CHICO, and a night that should have ended at home. The trip to CHICO was not supposed to be dangerous. It was familiar enough, a college basketball game, a night out, friends in a car. They were not dressed for the mountains, light jackets, normal clothes, nothing that suggested they expected deep snow, freezing temperatures, or a 20-mile walk through the forest roads. The game just ended before 10 p.m. Afterwards, they stopped at Burley's Market near the campus. The clerks saw them there. They brought snacks, pies, candy, drinks, milk, small things for the drive home. From what was later reported, they seemed normal, excited even. This is likely the last confirmed place where the group was seen alive. Not in the mountains, not near the trailer, a market at closing time after a basketball game. Then they got back into Jack's Mercury. The simple version of the night should have gone like this. Drive south, get home, sleep, wake up for the tournament. But after leaving CHICO, that version disappears. Somewhere on the way back, the car went east, towards Oroville, towards the mountains, towards the snow. This is the first real break. The group should have gone south towards home. Instead, the car ended up far east of where it should have been, on a mountain road in the Plumas National Forest area. A wrong turn is possible. The night was dark, roads can be confusing. Gary reportedly knew people near Foresttown, so maybe they were trying to make an extra stop. That would explain why they left the direct route. But only for a while, because this was not a missed turn that lasted a few minutes. It became a drive deep enough into the mountains that by the time the car stopped, the men were in a place none of them were dressed for. Picture this, right? The road is getting darker. The game is over, the story is behind them. The houses thin out, the road climbs, snow begins showing at the edges. Maybe someone thinks the next turn will fix it. Maybe someone thinks they are closer to help than they realize they are. Maybe nobody understands how far they have already gone. Then the car reaches a snow line. The tires spin. The car stops. But this is not where the evidence gives us a clear answer, because the Mercury was not destroyed. It was not buried. It was not sitting dead with an empty tank. It was lightly stuck, lightly enough that investigators believe 5 men could probably have pushed it free. So the strangest decision of the night happens here. The group leaves the car and starts walking into winter. The Mercury was first seen by a forestry worker on Saturday morning, February 25th. But at the time, it did not seem important. People sometimes drove into the area for winter recreation, so the car was not immediately connected to a missing persons case. That means the Mercury sat there for days before anyone understood what it was. After the missing persons bulletin went out, the worker recognized it and led deputies back to the area on Tuesday, February 28th. By then, the vehicle had become the first real clue. A turquoise and white 1969 Mercury Montego, alone near the snow line, no one inside, no footprints that could still tell the story, no immediate sign of where the man had gone to. Inside were wrappers from the snack spots at Burns Market. Maps were still folded in the glove compartment. The car had about a quarter tank of gas. The keys were not in the vehicle. When police hotwired it, the engine started. This detail kills the easiest explanation. They did not leave because the car had run out of gas. They did not leave because the engine was dead. They probably did not leave because the car was completely trapped. The snow was not deep enough to make that certain. There were signs the tires had spun, but investigators believed the men likely could have pushed it out. And the road itself creates another problem. The Mercury had been driven up a rough, rutted mountain road in the dark. A low, heavy car with 5 adult men inside should have shown damage. Undercarriage scraps, muffler damage, mud, something. But the underside was reportedly almost untouched. No gouges, no dents, not even damage to the low-hanging muffler. If the undercarriage was as undamaged as reported, then whoever drove that road either moved with extreme care or knew it better than Jack Madruga was believed to. This is why the car matters so much. A car in a winter is a shelter. It blocks wind, it keeps people together, it gives searchers a target. Walking away from it at night in light clothing on a mountain road is not a small choice, and the keys make it stranger. The keys were not in the vehicle. Some later accounts say they were eventually found with Jack Madruga's remains, but the safest confirmed point is this: whoever left the Mercury did not leave the keys behind. Not to drive away or to return quickly, just to carry them into the snow. So the question does not go away. Why leave the car? Why leave it with gas? Why leave it when it still ran? Why walk further into the mountains instead of back towards the road they came from? By the next morning, their families were worried. This was not normal. They had been expected home. They had a game. Some parents had waited up. Others woke to empty beds. A police report was filed with the Yuba County Sheriff's Department on Saturday night, but the case was already spreading across different jurisdictions and search areas. The men were from Yuba County. The car was found far from home. The remains would later be discovered in another remote area. That kind of spread makes any investigation harder, and by the time the car was understood as connected to a missing persons case, weather, time, and movement around the scene had already taken their share. Search teams went into the mountains after the car was identified, but winter was working against them. A storm came in, snow covered the area, searchers and snowcats nearly got into trouble themselves. If the men had left tracks, the weather could erase them. If they had dropped something, snow could bury it. If they were still alive somewhere, every hour made the odds worse. Eventually, the search had to stop until spring, because the mountain was too dangerous to keep looking. So families waited. The case waited. And whatever was left up there waited under the snow. When the snow melted, the mountain started giving pieces back. The first major piece was the trailer. The Forest Service trailer was about 19.4 miles from where the Mercury had been found, almost 20 miles on foot in winter, through snowdrifts that were reported to be 4 to 6 feet deep in places, without proper winter clothing, without boots meant for that kind of walk, without food, shelter, or certainty that anything was waiting ahead. And at least Ted Wire survived long enough to reach the trailer. Ted was found on a bed, covered in sheets. He had lost between 8 and 100 pounds. His beard suggested he had lived 8 to 13 weeks after the night he vanished. His shoes were gone, his feet were badly frostbitten, almost beyond use. The trailer had been locked, a window had been broken to get inside. Inside and around it were supplies that should have mattered: matches, paper bags, furniture that could provide heat, heavy clothing, sea rations, a proper tank outside that could have sent gas to the trailer's heating system, and a separate locker with enough additional dehydrated food to keep the group alive for a long time. But the fire was never lit, the propane was not used, the locker with the largest food supply was not opened. But some food had been eaten. More than a dozen sea ration cans had been opened. That contrast is what makes the trailer so difficult to understand. There was food they used, and there was food they never seemed to reach, and the windows stayed broken. One of the cans was purportedly opened with a P-38 military can opener. That detail is easy to miss, but it matters here, since of the 5 men, Jack Madruga and Gary Mathias were the ones with army experience. Jack's remains were found miles from the trailer. Gary's body was never found, but Gary's shoes were inside. Ted's shoes were missing. Gary's shoes were there. And Ted had been wrapped in sheets in a way some investigators believe he may not have been able to do himself, with his feet so severely damaged. So the trailer does not only tell us Ted survived, it suggests he may not have been alone, or at least not the entire time. After Ted was found, searchers discovered more remains. Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling were found along the road between the car and the trailer, about 11.4 miles from the Mercury. Jackie Hewitt was found later, closer to the trailer area. This is important because Jackie's location put him closer to the trailer than Madruga and Sterling. Whether he reached it, we do not know, but his remains place him closer to the final stretch of the route. Gary Mathias was not found. The map now had points: the car, Madruga and Sterling, Jackie, the trailer, Gary's shoes. But points on a map are not the same as an explanation. So now we move into the theories. 3 possibilities, and none of them fully close the case. Their group got lost. Maybe they missed the correct road home. Maybe they tried to visit someone near Forbestown. Maybe they followed the wrong route and did not realize how bad the mistake had become until the car was already near the snow line. After that, panic and a survival failure took over. If the wrong turn happened, then panic is what comes next. It is night. They are underdressed. The car is stuck, or appears stuck. Maybe they see tracks in the snow and think help is close. Maybe they believe a cabin or a ranger station is just ahead, so they leave the car, and that one decision proved fatal. The walk from the car to the trailer was almost 20 miles. 20 miles in normal conditions is already a long walk. Now remove almost everything that would make it survivable. No proper wind coats, no boots made for mountain snow, no gloves or gear meant for that kind of cold, just normal clothes from a night out. Then add darkness, snowdrifts, fear. No clear destination. Every step would make turning back harder. Every hour would make thinking clearly harder. By the time anyone reached the trailer, they may have already been injured, exhausted, and beyond normal judgment. This helps explain the strange decisions inside. Why was the heat not used? Why did the larger food locker stay closed? Why did the window stay open? Why was survival possible on paper but failed in reality? People in extreme cold do not always make decisions that look logical later, but this theory still has a problem. It begins too late. It explains how a disaster could unfold after the car was abandoned, but it does not fully explain why the car was abandoned in the first place. Not when it had gas, when it could run, when it was only lightly stuck, and not when the safest object in the entire scene was one thing they walked away from. The second theory is built around one question. Why did they leave the car? A working car in winter is a shelter. It keeps people together. It gives searchers something to find. So this theory says the Mercury was abandoned because, for some reason, staying with it felt more dangerous than walking away. That is the spine of the theory, but there is no confirmed attacker or a weapon, not even a clean sign of violence at the Mercury. But the car still feels wrong. It was far from the expected route. It had reportedly been driven with unusual care over rough ground. It still had fuel, could still start. It was not trapped in a way that clearly forced them to leave. So if the answer is not about a mechanical failure and not an obvious impossible snowbank, then something else made them walk. Maybe it was fear, maybe another vehicle. Maybe a confrontation, maybe a person they trusted or they didn't trust. None of that is proven, but it is why this theory has never fully disappeared. If someone else was involved, it does not need to look like a chase. A chase would probably leave damage. This could have been quieter, like a threat or a command, a situation where staying in the car felt worse than walking away from it. Then there is Joseph Jones. Jones was reportedly on that same road the night the men disappeared. His own car became stuck not far from where the Mercury would later be found. While trying to free it, he suffered what doctors later confirmed was a mild heart attack. He said that sometime during the night he saw headlights. He heard voices. He described what looked like a group of men near the car. He also described seeing a woman with a baby moving in the glare of the headlights. That part was never confirmed. No woman or baby was ever identified, and given Sean's condition that night, it may have been confusion, distortion, or even hallucinations. But Sean said that when he called out for help, the headlights went out and the voices stopped. Later, he said he saw flash beams. He called out again, but then again, the lights went out. Then, after his own car went out of gas, Jones walked towards Mountain House, and on that walk, he said he passed the Mercury, empty. That is the unsettling part of his account. Men near the car earlier in the night. Hours later, the car was still there, but no one was around it. That sequence is disturbing. People near the car, a call for help, then complete silence. Then the car was empty. But Jones cannot be treated as a perfect witness. He was ill, in pain. His account changed over the years. He later acknowledged he may have been half-conscious, hallucinating, so his story cannot prove this theory. It can only deepen the uneasiness around it. If Jones was mistaken, then the case is still strange. If he was right, then the men may have not been alone on that road. And if they were not alone, then the abandoned car becomes much harder to explain as an accident. But even if someone else was on that road, this theory still stops short of the trailer. It does not tell us who was inside, who covered Ted, and it does not explain why Gary's shoes stayed behind. That is where the final theory begins. The final theory is about Gary. Gary Mathias was never found. His shoes were found inside the trailer. Ted Wire's shoes were missing. Food had reportedly been opened with a tool connected to Army experience. Ted was wrapped in sheets. And Jack Madruga, the other Army veteran, was found miles away from the trailer. So Gary becomes the center of the ending because he is the one the evidence points towards without ever showing us where he went. Here's one possible version. Gary reaches the trailer with Ted. Maybe Jackie reaches it too. They are cold, exhausted, frostbitten, and far past the point where normal thinking is easy. The trailer is locked, so someone breaks the window. They get inside. Gary, with Army experience, may know how to open sealed rations. Food is eaten. Ted is alive, but badly injured. At some point, Ted is placed on the bed and covered in with sheets. Maybe Gary does it. Maybe Jackie does. Maybe someone else was there. We do not know, but Ted's condition makes the sheets feel important. They suggest care, or at least the presence of another person. Then there are the shoes. Gary's tennis shoes were left behind. Teddy's shoes were gone. One possibility is that Gary's feet had swollen or been injured by frostbite, so he put on Ted's larger shoes before leaving. Gary may have been alive in that trailer. He may have eaten there. He may have helped Ted, and then he left. The question is, why? Did he go for help? Did Ted die, leaving Gary alone with the body? Did the trailer start to feel like a dead end? Was he scared of being caught for breaking in and using supplies? Did he think civilization was closer in another direction? Or did something happen that never made it into the evidence? The simplest answer is that Gary could have walked out and died somewhere in the wilderness. That may be true. The mountains could have taken him and left nothing behind. Animals, weather, distance, and time can erase a body, but it is not emotionally simple, because if Gary left the trailer alive, he may have been the last person who knew anything, the last survivor, the last witness, maybe the last victim. And with him gone, the final chapter vanished too. There were other reported details. A watch the family did not recognize, a lighter found some distance away, items that sound like clues. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. A ranger could have left them, a visitor could have left them, a searcher could have left them. In a case like this, small objects can trick you into writing a story too quickly, so I'm not going to include anything related to these objects. But Gary's shoes, the open sea rations, Ted's condition, and the missing body are the real evidence. Everything beyond that has to stay in the category of possibility, and the possibility is enough, because the final known scene already gives us the question the whole case ends on. If Gary's shoes stayed in the trailer, but Gary didn't, where did he go? So, what probably happened? The most careful answer is not one clean theory. It is a chain, and each part of the chain seems to explain a different layer of the same night. The wrong road can explain how the group reached the mountains, and admitting a survival failure can explain how the walk in the trailer became deadly. Fear can explain why the car still feels wrong. Gary being missing leads to why the case refuses to close. Those ideas do not fully cancel each other out. They might all be touching different parts of the truth. Maybe the night began with a simple detour. Maybe the car got stuck just enough to scare them. Maybe they followed tracks because they thought help was close. Maybe the cold did the rest. Or maybe something happened on the road that changed the decision completely. That's the problem. The evidence does not point to one clear story. It points to a route, a car, a walk, a shelter, and then an unsettling silence. By the end, Madruga and Sterling are dead before the trailer. Jackie is found closer. Ted survives for weeks inside. Gary's shoes are left behind. Gary is not. Not a straight line, a broken one at that. The window, the can opener, the sheets, the shoes, the man who never came back. The Yuba County 5K is disturbing because it almost makes sense. You can follow the road, find the car, trace the walk, reach the trailer, you can see the food, the matches, the clothing, the propane, the broken window, you can place Gary's shoes on the floor, Ted on the bed, you can mark where the others were found, but the moment you try to connect everything, the story breaks. Why did they leave the car? Why did no one use the heat? Why was so much food untouched? Then the question becomes smaller and somehow worse. Who covered Ted? Why were Gary's shoes there? And where is Gary Mathias? Maybe it was an accident made worse by panic and the cold weather. Maybe there was more fear than the evidence can measure. Maybe someone else was on that boat. Or maybe the answer died somewhere between the Mercury and the trailer, with the only people who could explain it. The evidence stayed behind. The car, the trailer, the sheets, the food, the shoes, the names, but the explanation did not. That is why the case still feels unfinished, because the final question is not why the group ended up on that mountain road. It is what happened after Ted reached the trailer, what Gary saw, what Gary did, why did his shoes stay behind, and where he went when he walked out into the snow. Until that question has an answer, Gary Mathias remains the missing piece, not just of the case, of the final hours. This was the case of the Yuba County 5. I've been Void, and I'll see you next time.